Hey, what's up you guys? I'm Sara Lubratt and today we are talking about why my book took 7 drafts to complete while I'm on my celebratory trip, celebrating, of course, finishing Project DE. So thank you guys so much for clicking on this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. And without further ado, let's get into where the book idea came from and driving to this Airbnb. I'm now 4 hours into my 6-hour drive and I just pulled over at the Utah-Colorado border. 6 hours of driving complete and we are at the Airbnb. Let's do a quick little tour. You can see the kitchen back into the main bedroom. There's also a bed upstairs. It's up these very steep steps, but that's the little extra bedroom. Back this way, you have a nice little pantry area, the like full kitchen, a little like bathroom, laundry room area, and then the back bedroom. This is the perfect size for just me for 2 nights. I started writing Project DE back in college. I wrote a book in high school. I worked on that book for like the 4 years from I think like freshman or sophomore year to the freshman year of college. And then sophomore year of college is when I had the idea for Project DE. Project DE, if you are new to the channel, is a high fantasy story told from 3 points of view that deals with evil and darkness, dragons, a relic-based magic system. I think it's a really wonderful time. But when I first came up with the idea for the story, I had seen a photo on Pinterest, like a piece of artwork that to this day I can't find. Like I have gone back and I've tried to look for it. I've found things similar, but I have not been able to find like the exact picture. But basically it was of 2 dragons sort of like flying over like a fantasy city that was in the mountains. There was like a singular road leading up to it, etc. and so forth. A really stunning piece of artwork. However, I still can't find it, but that image sparked an idea in my brain. And as this idea sort of simmered, which was probably for about a year as I was finishing the book that I wrote in high school during my freshman year of college, I was letting this new idea simmer. And then eventually through doing that, that idea that had been sparked by that Pinterest image, which I thought was gonna be the plot, ended up becoming the villain's backstory. And when I figured out that that's what I wanted the villain's backstory to be, that's when I started writing. These cups that my Airbnb has are kind of dragon scaly. That's fun. I don't know why it looks so bright in here. It's dark out now. I'm making tea. I was not feeling great after driving for 6 hours to get to my Airbnb in Colorado from Salt Lake City, Utah. So I decided to take my first night, just really chill and drink tea and watch Selling Sunset on the couch, especially because I got there with like an hour until sunset. So it kind of wasn't worth going out into the park. And I decided to save that for my second day there. I was definitely dehydrated earlier, so I just had a really chill evening watching Selling Sunset, drinking tea and baking cookies. And now I'm ready for bed, so I will talk to you guys in the morning about draft 1 and then the rest of the drafts throughout the day. Good morning. Let's talk about draft 1 as I'm sitting here eating breakfast. So I had the idea for the book. I sit down and I start writing the book thinking that it's going to be a 400 to 500 page book. And then I start writing and I keep 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 writing with as much compassion as I can possibly give my past self. Draft 1 was a hot mess. It took me at around that 4-year mark to realize that DE was not just going to be one book and that I needed to stop writing and rewrite what I had to make it into book 1 of a trilogy, because that's the pace that the story was moving at. And I say that meaning how I wrote draft 1 was rather chaotic, but I didn't know any better, and it worked enough, so we're gonna just let it be what it was. But I was not writing in chronological order. I was writing each of the 3, at that point there were 4 characters that had POVs. I was writing those in separate documents. When I would come up with an idea for a scene, but I wasn't sure how it was going to intertwine with the story yet, I would write that in a different document. And at one point in time, draft 1 of Project DE had 22 documents, all with different information in them. A couple of them were notes documents, so they just had like the ideas that I was coming up with that I was writing on post-it notes or in my notebooks or on my phone or on my computer or whatever, but I was compiling them all into my notes documents. So I remember having one day where I spent 8 hours, like not even kidding, a full 8 hours reorganizing my documents into one like master doc, which was like a complete and utter mess. But that master doc from draft 1 I still have, but that sits at 213,000 words. There's a hummingbird outside that I don't think you guys can see, that I can see in the reflection of my computer. computer, but it was at that point where I hit 216,000 words that I was writing the end of book 1, or like a good-ish stopping point for book 1, if DE was indeed going to be a trilogy. And considering that I was already at well over 200,000 words, I was like, yeah, I should probably stop so that I don't end up with like 500,000 or 600,000 words for a book. But I remember sitting down at my computer, realizing that I was writing a good stopping point in one of the perspectives if I was going to turn DE into a trilogy and not just a 400 to 500 page book, which now book 1 after draft 7, which we will get to, is over 400 pages. So draft 1 took me 4 years on and off throughout college. I was not writing in chronological order. I remember submitting some of the chapters that I was writing for my creative writing classes in college, which was honestly great. And I remember naming some of my characters when I was studying abroad in Paris, because something that I should probably mention is I don't name characters until I really get to know them. So I will give my characters placeholder names until basically they get a promotion and get a name. So in draft 1, the 3 main characters in this book were Warrior, in all caps so that I could search for it. She's more of a knight, but Warrior's what her placeholder name was. And then the other 2 characters are sisters. So I had OS for older sister and YS for younger sister. And those are how I referred to my characters. It's how I searched for my characters' names later when I chose to give them names. But of course, when I was submitting for my creative writing classes, I couldn't just turn in a document that didn't have character names. So I named a couple of my characters when I was in Paris. I had started writing a little bit before the summer that I studied abroad. And then I was writing more. I was submitting those to those creative writing classes. I continued to submit chapters from my book as I was writing them for my creative writing classes in college, which I had a couple of my professors pull me aside and just be like, can you stop submitting like chapters? We're a short story class. And I'm like, no. And somehow, through sheer will, I got those 22 documents down to 1 master doc. And then I basically went, well, shoot, this is gonna need some editing. Okay, I'm a little concerned. The parking lot was very, very small, and I do think that Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, which is where I'm at, is like the 5th least visited of all, I want to say like 62 national parks in the US. But the parking lot was very small, and I know that there are bears in the area, so I have my bear spray, but I just stopped some hikers that I passed, and they said that this is not a very popular hike. So I'm a little concerned, but I can already see like a wall of the Black Canyon. I just turned around, I heard thunder. I will come back after this weather kind of passes to do this hike, but I'm gonna go drive along the rim and do some of the lookouts. And now the weather kind of looks like it's moving past me that way, so I'm turning back around, we're gonna do this hike. And I just saw some people get onto this trail too, so I know that there are people behind me. Okay, well let's walk and talk about draft 2 while I'm carrying my bear spray. So because I had started writing Project DE intending for it to be 1 book, I needed to then spend draft 2 doing some developmental edits to try and make it read like the first book in a series instead of how I had started writing it, which was attempting to write the whole story in 1 book. So I'm already out of breath. To start out draft 2, I sat down with a notebook and a printed out version of draft 1, and then started reading it and making notes about things I wanted to change in draft 2. I think I called this my big picture edits draft. So basically I was focusing on developmental edits. Holy cow. I'm too busy talking. Look at that. That's kind of funny. The place I'm hiking to right now is called Exclamation Point, and I kind of feel like I just exclaimed. So for draft 2, I printed out the story so that I wasn't making any changes as I was reading, trying to make myself stay away from line editing and proofreading and just focus on like the bigger picture things that needed to change. Specifically focusing on rounding out characters, both personalities and character arcs that had changed throughout the like 4 years that I wrote draft 1, and then also working on rounding out plot points so that the first book more stands alone as a first book instead of feeling like it's a part 1 and then there would be a part 2 and a part 3. I basically had to make it feel more like a book instead of a part 1. And then I went through and implemented those changes. I'm not normally comfortable with like filming while I'm hiking, but in bear country, you're supposed to make noise so that they know where you are. So talking to my camera works great for this. On my notes that I had written down, draft 2 started with 87,000 words in chapter form, even though I was like well over 200,000 words total in my notes and stuff for DE. And then I ended with 109,000 at the end of draft 2 after implementing my developmental edits. And that was draft 2. Well, now I'm getting rained on. I can't decide if I want to turn around or keep going. I really want to see this viewpoint, but there are so few people on this trail that I like really don't know what I want to do. And it's raining and I don't know how to get out of the rain. I found a tree to keep me a little drier. I think this rain decides it. I think I'm turning around. I think that I could go build confidence doing some of the viewpoints and other lookouts that are closer to the car. And then if I'm feeling confident, I can come back and do this in like a couple hours. I think that's a good idea. It's like a happy medium. So I was totally freaking myself out about bears. And up until that point in the hike, I had passed 2 groups of people and the wind and the clouds were making me like really anxious. And I was really scared of bears. I didn't know the area, was just like totally spooking myself out. So I decided to turn around and head back to the car. And then I ran into people that were heading to the same lookout that I was going to, which was exclamation point. So then I decided to ask them if I could follow them because I was freaked out about bears. And they were a very sweet couple from Wisconsin and they said yes. Now back at my car, there's like dark storm clouds in the distance again, but I made friends. Look at how precarious that looks. I genuinely was worried about getting that close to the edge, but the fence gives you like a false sense of security until you're staring straight down 2,000 feet at the river below. That's thunder. So there's only like 3 trails in this national park that will take you down to the bottom of the canyon. And one of them is like right here. You like start up here and then you like go way down there. And you have to like descend 2,000 feet in a mile. They only give out 15 permits a day to get down to the bottom. And up at the ranger station, you had to like write your name and when you left. And then when you were done, you had to go back and erase your name so that if people get lost, the rangers know. It's just scary. So this canyon is kind of reminding me of a scene that I wrote for book 2 of Project DE. It's Streaky, sorry. Where a character throws something into like this chasm, but I ended up taking it out, or I don't think I'm going to use it because even though that's a super, super cool scene, because one of the characters throws something in and then another character finds it, I don't think it actually makes sense for the story, which kind of sucks because it was a really cool, like really intense scene on both parts. But that's totally what this is reminding me of. Like this would be a great place to like throw something off of, in theory, in like a fantasy book. You do not throw things off of these walls, and there are signs everywhere for that. Because in case somebody is like hiking down below, you know, one of the crazy people that's actually going down to the river, you don't want to like harm another hiker. I looked very briefly at hiking down there just to like, you know, see what options there were. And like I said, there were like 3 hikes. They were all incredibly steep. They were all like marked as like do at your own risk. And on All Trails, which is like the hiking app that I use to find trails and stuff, like every single review just talked about how tall the poison ivy was. And I was like, I'm good. I'm not gonna get poison ivy on this trip. All of the All Trails reviews also talked about how each of the trails that led down to the bottom of the canyon had like cliff faces that you had to like scramble down. And there was absolutely no way that I was doing that alone on this trip. Not to mention the poison ivy, which was just kind of like the cherry on top that just really made me feel okay with not doing those hikes. is giving me anxiety, so I'm gonna go back to my car. I think there's 3 more viewpoints on this street that I want to hit, but I'm in no rush. So we're gonna sit here, we're gonna let it rain. And while it's doing that, we can talk about draft 3. Hopefully you guys can hear me with the rain, but we're gonna try it regardless. So before I started working on draft 3, I went through draft 2, and for every single chapter, I wrote the gist of that chapter down on an index card. Because I had written the 4, and then eventually I cut it down to 3 POVs in separate documents. So even when I combined all of my documents into the one master doc, the layout basically looked like 3 different books because it was one entire character's POV, another entire character's POV, and then another character's POV, and then the 4th character's POV. So none of them were intertwined. And I needed to figure out how the chapters of this book would intermix with each other. And I thought that the easiest way to do that would be to write them all down on index cards and lay them out on the floor, and then just kind of rearrange them until it made sense, and then move those chapters around before I then started draft 3. So draft 3. What I had written down for draft 3 was the rewrite. I pulled up my draft 2 document and I pulled up an empty Word document, and then I just started going through and rewriting like paragraph by paragraph. And the reason that I was doing this was because I had written draft 1 of Project DE over the span of 4 years. My voice had changed, my writing style had changed, the characters had changed, so the characters were not consistent throughout the book. Also, because I was jumping around in draft 1 and not writing in like any kind of order, the characters were different and like it just didn't work. So draft 3 was the rewrite to bring all of the writing up to my like writing ability at that point in time, just so that it sounded consistent, because as we grow and as we write more and more, our voice does change and our style changes. So I wanted to bring all of the words up to my ability at that point in time. Oh, my friends just pulled up. And then after draft 3, the rewrite, I was like, yeah, this book's pretty good. I think it's ready for people to read it. So then I sent it to beta readers. Okay, it seems like there's a break in the rain, so let's go. Okay, now that it just rained, it smells amazing out here. Oh, it's another sketchy fence thing. Okay. So I'm currently on the South Rim. I'm spending my whole trip on the South Rim, but the North Rim is like right there. I don't know if you guys can see those cars, but that's a parking lot. And even though it's right there, it takes an hour and a half to drive around to get to the North Rim, or the South Rim. I'm on the North Rim. Whatever, it takes an hour and a half to drive around to get to that side. So this national park is in Colorado. I'm at like 7,000 feet of elevation right now, but you can barely tell. It looks like there's like some rolling hills, and then there's just this like 2,000 foot straight plummet in like the middle of nowhere, seemingly. Wow, okay, that was windy. That got a little scary, so I came back to my car. This canyon is like absolutely stunning. I wish it was sunny. Supposedly the clouds are supposed to lift for sunset tonight. I wanted to get the sunset last night, but was just like not feeling it, and it was cloudy, so whatever. But if it's going to be sunny tonight, I could come back into the park, come to one of these stops, and just like watch the sunset. And I'll have to figure out which stop I'm coming to though, because these are all been gorgeous. Yeah, there's nobody behind me, so I'm not worried about doing this, but I'm stopped on the edge of the rim road right now. The edge of meaning the far side of. And I kind of wish that I was here with somebody else just so that I could look out the window as I'm driving, because obviously I'm driving the rim road. I don't want to be looking out there while I'm driving because there's no fence. Don't tell my parents that. And then it's the canyon, like right there. Again, I'm stopped on the side of the road, but look at this. Just out the window. I just got back to my Airbnb. and you're sliding. I just got back to my Airbnb for a 4 p.m. tea and lunch break. Because it was cloudy and it's not supposed to be as cloudy later, I'm gonna go back and hang out at one of the viewpoints for sunset. I'm hoping if things continue to lift. It looks brighter out than it was a little bit ago, so I'm hopeful. My tea tab thingy says, give thanks for unknown blessings that are already on the way, which is very, very cute for, you know, this trip that I'm taking. So, beta readers. I believe I sent draft 3 to 4 or 5 people. 2 of them started it, 1 of them only made it halfway, and 1 of them finished it. So until a couple months ago from when I'm filming this, I had only had 1 person beyond myself read my book in its entirety, which like really meant a lot, and I was so happy that that person decided to read all of it. But also getting the feedback of the person that stopped reading, like where they stopped reading, was also really good feedback. But then when I got the feedback from the beta readers, then I like didn't really know what to do with it, because the person that finished reading the book, her primary feedback was that like the ending wasn't satisfying. And I was like, well, that's kind of because I started writing it trying to write like one book that was 400 to 500 pages instead of writing like the first book in a series. But with that feedback, I was able to realize that I hadn't done enough to like round out the book on its own. So then I went over all of my beta reader feedback, saw that she said that she didn't love the ending. There was also a point in the middle where one of the characters basically takes a detour, and I call it a detour because it's not all that important to the story. I included it because I thought it had some cool scenes in it, but ultimately that part doesn't really matter. And the beta reader picked up on that and was like, she still ends up in the same place. Like, why do we have to take an extra week and a half to like hit this other point instead of her just like rushing back? And it's like, you know what? That is a really good point, but that's going to take some rewriting. I know I was dressed here. I'm at a loss for words. This place is so cool. Honestly, I don't really remember drafts 4 and 5. I remember little bits about them. I remember that in draft 4, I was implementing beta reader feedback because I had just gotten that back, but I remember not finishing the draft. I know that I wrote a new beginning in draft 4, and I know that that beginning is much stronger, and I'm still very happy with that newer beginning. And then I know that I stopped about halfway through the book because I hit the part where one of my characters, you know, takes that extra detour that really didn't need to be in the book, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So I thought I knew. And so then I was like, you know what, I would have done this totally differently. And so then I started draft 5 in an attempt to basically like start over and continue incorporating that beta reader feedback. And then I got to about the same point in draft 5 that I did draft 4, which was not dealing with that middle scene or the ending and like needing to rewrite those middle scenes or the ending. And then I stopped draft 5 and then I got to draft 6. So drafts 4 and 5 were incomplete. So I've thought about just combining them and considering them just like one draft together, but I mentally, when I was going through that, considered them to be different drafts, so I'm going to consider them to be different drafts, even though I really thought I had it all figured out when I started draft 5, because I was like, oh, what I was doing in draft 4, like that didn't make any sense, I should have been doing it this way, and then I still didn't finish draft 5. So then I started draft 6. I'm trying to tell if this is the lookout I want to be at for sunset, or if I want to go back to one of the ones I was at earlier. I think I'm looking for an overlook that has a lot of like rock exposure, but I think this is when like being on the south rim would be really nice, because then you're looking at like the north rock during sunset, which I'm not really going to be able to get being on the north side. Sunset's also in an hour and a half, so I have some time to kill. Draft 6 is when I finally confronted what my beta reader had told me about the middle and the ending, and that's why I did rewriting in draft 6. I started my YouTube channel around the time I hit 200,000 words in my first draft. I got a lot of questions from people asking me why I was rewriting in draft 6, because I was on draft 6, and I completely get it. It sounds insane, but that's why. There's a spider web attached to my phone. That's bad, because I had not yet confronted the scenes that I needed to rewrite in the middle and the ending. And so that's what I spent draft 6 doing. I also made other smaller changes and stuff earlier on, but those were mostly line editing. The spiderweb is still attached. Oh, it's on my other hand. I hope something wasn't on that. And then I got to a point where I thought draft 6 was pretty good. Draft 6 took me a while from what I remember. I was really hoping that it wouldn't, but I think it took me like almost a year. But also throughout the process of writing DE, whenever I would need a break from DE, I would switch over to writing a different project. So in the span of the like 8 or 9 years that I was working on DE for, I would take like month-long-ish breaks to go work on writing something else. So in the span of working on DE, I've also started like 3 or 4 other books and made pretty significant progress with them, but even though they're not like 100% done, which I think is also part of why DE took so long, was because I was also then taking step backs to go work on other things. But then I got to the end of editing in draft 6 and I was feeling pretty good about it. I was feeling rather optimistic and decided that draft 7 was going to be the last draft that I worked on before I got external advice from like an agent or a publisher or an editor or something like that. I know I said I wanted to be out here until sunset, but that's where the sun is, right about there. And there's nobody out here, which is both amazing and kind of scary. And I know that wildlife tends to be a little more active around dawn and dusk, so I'm a little worried about seeing something. So I might sit in my car, I might drive around a little bit, but also with how close the rim road gets to just, you know, sheer cliff faces, I also don't want to be driving back in the dark. So I might not totally stay out here until sunset. North Rim is like a lot less populated, but to get there, I have to drive on gravel roads, and even like my Airbnb is off of a gravel road, and I just feel like I'm driving through the country because I'm passing horses, I'm passing cows, there's chickens and ducks on the Airbnb's property. I feel like I'm out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Them bounding through the fields. You're good. Stay with your friends. Excuse me, sir. Oh, he looked at me. Hi. You're good. Go ahead. Come on, you're good. Do you want me to go? Like, what's going on? Please don't run in front of my car. Got some funky antlers going on there, buddy. What a nice young lad, stopping for traffic, looking both ways before he crosses the street. I'm sure his mama would be proud. And now, okay, the oven's ready for my cookies. But last but certainly not least, draft 7. Like I said, I was feeling confident after draft 6. I felt good about the new ending. I felt good about the chapters that I had rewritten. I just knew that because I had rewritten those chapters, they needed to be looked at again. And so draft 7, I focused on a lot of line editing, proofreading, going over those chapters again. I started with going over the ending just to like read that again before I started rereading all of draft 6. Draft 6 was also at like 133,000 words, and for a debut adult fantasy novel, it's recommended to be closer to like 100,000 words. And so I wanted to cut down on words. And so I went through, I think draft 7 only took me like 3 or 4 months. I would print out like 40 pages. I did some of the editing by hand. I took some pages camping with me so that I could focus on that while there were no other like distractions around. And I kept working on it until I finished draft 7 with 108,000 words. I think it was like 107,800 something. I think draft 7 was my fastest draft, but it was also potentially the easiest because what I was looking for was just like phrasing and taking things out. Anytime like a sentence didn't quite make sense, I just like deleted it. And really getting the opportunity to fine tune this book that I've been working on for so long to make it closer to how I see the story in my head. I also may or may not have still been naming characters in draft 7 and in every draft prior to that. I also sent draft 7 out to beta readers just to get some more feedback on what I could potentially cut, like if things made sense. I think I was about 100 pages in when I sent it to my beta readers. And then my beta readers were so helpful in just being like, this doesn't totally make sense, or like this sentence was basically said like 3 paragraphs prior, like you could remove this. And I was like, great. So they were helping me like remove words. I was taking out words, and then I got it down to 108,000 words. And that is why my book took 7 drafts to complete. After doing this, I think in doing this, meaning writing DE in 7 drafts, I don't think I'm gonna need 7 drafts in the future. Somebody has commented on my videos a couple times about that, about like, do you think every book is gonna take 7 drafts? And I'm like, well, no, like I'm learning. Like this is all part of the process, is to like learn what works and what doesn't work. And if I had known what I was gonna do in draft 6, then I probably wouldn't have had drafts 4 and 5, because those are the ones that I like stopped midway through because I was too scared and didn't know like how to approach the ending and like rewriting all of those chapters, and I was kind of living in denial. I think that DE was an incredible beast to tackle for like my first book that I've gotten this far through the process, and I love it so much for that. I'm so grateful for my younger self for starting this book like 9 years ago and I'm so happy that I'm done with draft 7 now. But also a part of spending so long on not only draft 1 of Project DE but the entire book, I spent so much time world building and building the foundations of the story, and so that's already established. I know where the story's going. I know what happens in books 2 and 3. So I think that the next 2 books in the series will be written much faster. And then I also hope that my other books that I begin writing, I am able to accomplish faster just because I have now experienced completing something in its entirety. I think one of my biggest things would be I would change how I was choosing my beta readers. I would also theoretically try to write a series as a series in the future instead of trying to write a book and then having it turn into a series. So yeah, I hope that every book in the future will not take 7 drafts or 9 years to complete, but I am very, very happy about the things that I learned about myself and which parts of the process I like the most in this taking this long. I discovered that I love editing. Like draft 7 was my favorite draft. As much as I like love the brainstorming and like coming up with things in like draft 1 just took 4 years, so like that was harder to do. Breezing through in like 3 months to do draft 7 was incredible. It was so invigorating. I was so ready to be done. I just love having something to work with. Like the first draft is fine. The first draft is really whatever, but I love then being able to make that draft better. I would love to know what you guys have learned from writing books down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video until the end. Make sure you like and subscribe if you have not already. I'm Sara Lubratt and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.